And they've done an unprecedented thing here. They're prosecuting Trump for bookkeeping offenses, okay? Every time they come out and they say, historic, no one's ever convicted Phil. For what, bookkeeping? You broke 234 years of historical precedent for bookkeeping offenses. Got it.
Look, this lawfare against President Trump, again, it's undermining the integrity of the democratic process. They're supposed to be the sacred guardians of our democracy, and yet what they're doing is essentially denying people the ability to engage in a presidential election. Missouri is a sovereign state with a sovereign interest in participating in a national election on equal footing with every other state, and we can't let a rogue prosecutor and a collusive judiciary in the state of New York.
State versus state. Missouri suing New York and Alvin Bragg for their election interference for rigging 2024 by prosecuting Trump, taking him out of the campaign, costing him millions of dollars, and gagging him while they present rigged evidence with a biased judge in one of the most inappropriate jurisdictions in the entire country. Might be a problem when you're trying to have a free and fair election. So Alvin Bragg now gets hit with this puppy from Missouri, and it is from the Attorney General. We've talked a lot about him because he has a lot of good filings. His name is Andrew Bailey, and here's what he posted over on X. He says, all right, America, I have filed suit against the state of New York for hijacking the presidential election by illegally scheming to jail their presidential opponent, President Trump. Says New York is waging war on American democracy, some might say insurrecting us, and Missouri will not let it stand. It's nice to see it. Says New York's illicit prosecution, gag order, and sentencing of President Trump, which has also now been postponed, has undermined his ability to campaign. He was bogged down there in trial every day, except Wednesdays. Then Joe Biden came out and said, how about we debate on Wednesday? Make my day, pal. And then Joe Biden showed up and took a dookie right on himself in front of all of America. Now, the overt meddling in a presidential election sabotages Missourians' ability to cast a well-informed vote mere months before the election, a point we've made for a long time. Not only is Trump's gag problematic for Trump, does it limit his ability to communicate to us? Clearly it does. But what about our ability to receive information from him? If you are like me and you think the justice system kind of a necessary part of a functional country, and we have concerns that that justice system is being wrecked, well, the person who is the subject in the story of the wrecking might have some nice perspective, unique in fact, that we'd like to hear from, wouldn't we? Yes, we would. Donald Trump cannot communicate that to us, so that hurts us. That impedes our rights and infringes on our liberties. So New York's illicit prosecution undermines his ability to campaign. The overt meddling sabotages Missourians, their citizens' rights. So Bailey says, I'm asking the Supreme Court to declare that New York's actions unlawfully interfere with the presidential election. The Supreme Court of the United States, by the way, to remove any gag orders against Trump and to halt the impending sentencing until after the presidential election. So now Trump has been gagged. Andrew Bailey says the Supreme Court, we need their permission, right? You don't just get to file lawsuits states against states. So you need to get their permission. So you go in there and you say, hey, Supreme Court, can we have your permission to please sue them? And the Supreme Court will come out and say, maybe, yes or no. Says that we are asking for the Supreme Court to invoke its original jurisdiction. So we just go directly to SCOTUS. We bypass all the other stuff because it's one state versus another. Under Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution and settle this once and for all. Says right now, Missouri has a huge problem with New York. Missouri's not alone, man. We're all Missouri right now. And I will not sit idly by while a Soros-backed prosecutors in New York hold Missouri voters hostage in this presidential election. And so a great ex-post from Andrew Bailey, the Attorney General out of Missouri. And that is not just empty rhetoric. He has in fact filed a suit. You see, this is Missouri versus New York, state versus state in a new era of lawfare in the United States, saying that in the Supreme Court of the United States, our citizens of Missouri are sick and tired of prosecutors like Alvin Bragg and Matthew Colangelo, who came from Joe Biden's office, and Tish James, and the rest of them. So here's a motion for leave. So this is permission. Supreme Court, do we have permission here to file a bill of complaint, which we can think of that as a lawsuit? File civil lawsuit asking for relief. They say, here, Supreme Court, we are now knocking on your door, respectfully seeking leave to file the accompanying bill of complaint against the state of New York. Now, Missouri's asking for very modest relief, not asking for the world here. All we want is a simple stay of New York's gag order on Trump. Merchan said, you can't talk about my daughter or the fact that she donated and works for Democrats and in particular Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And they want a stay of the impending sentence against Trump during the 2024 election season so that Missourians and the rest of us can participate in the election free from New York's exercise of coercive power, limiting the ability of Trump to campaign, which was by design. He was there every day in a cold, freezing courtroom, giving little press briefings on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and Joe Biden was even mocking him about that. Now, as set forth in the accompanying brief, which we'll read, and the complaint, the actions by New York, says Missouri, have created constitutional harms to our citizens that threaten to infringe on our rights. Namely, the gag order unlawfully impedes the ability of electors to fulfill their federal functions. And also, the gag order also violates the Purcell principle. And New York's gag order also violates the First Amendment rights of Missouri citizens to listen to the campaign of a specific individual. Free speech also means freedom to hear the speech. You don't have any free speech if you can only speak to the wall. So the right to receive is ours, and they've stripped that away from us. Now, Missouri respectfully submits, Supreme Court, that the foregoing violations constitutes considerable harms to the voters, and our voters will be precluded from fully engaging in or hearing from major party candidates all the way up during this election. These harms are direct from New York. They are calculated, and they've done an unprecedented thing here. They're prosecuting Trump for bookkeeping offenses, okay? Every time they come out and they say, historic, no one's ever convicted Phil. For what, bookkeeping? You broke 234 years of historical precedent for bookkeeping offenses. Got it. And Trump paid his lawyer, that's it? And you didn't even consider immunity at all? You didn't. This court should grant leave to file the complaint. So saying, Supreme Court, give us permission to file this. Respectfully submitted, your friends, Andrew Bailey, Joshua M. Devine from Missouri. Now, here is the actual bill of complaint. So right now they're saying, can we have permission, please? If you give us permission, we're going to drop this on Alvin Bragg's desk, like 35 dozen donuts. They now bring an opening section telling us this is the nature of the action. Okay, it's not very complicated. They say Missouri is now seeking to invoke this court's original jurisdiction. All we have is a simple request. We want to stay, not even delete it, just stop the gag order from being in power, and we want the sentence to be stayed at least until after the 2024 election. Not a big deal. This imposes no harm on the state of Missouri at all, or the state of New York, but it ensures that the voters from Missouri and us all across America will be able to make our voices heard in November without one state like Bragg and Tisch interfering with everybody. Saying New York's gag order and impending sentence against Trump, they interfere with his ability to freely travel. He can't campaign. They also interfere with the rights of Americans and members of the Electoral College in general, not just us, but also the people who are in the process. They cannot hear Trump's political speech. Nothing is more destructive to the health of a democracy than distrust in the outcome of an election. And yet New York has brought transparently weak charges for the transparent purpose of trying to impose political damage against Trump and trying to restrain his ability to campaign in advance of an election that's forecasted by the polls to be very close. And as the former governor and former attorney general of New York said 2 weeks ago, they confirmed, if his name was not Donald Trump and if he wasn't running for president, I'm telling you that no case would have been brought. So this lawfare Supreme Court is poisonous to American democracy. The American people ought to be able to participate in a presidential election free from New York's interference, and any gag order and sentence should be stayed. Now, we know who the parties are. Let's get to the facts. Here's what we know. New York, through Alvin Bragg and Matthew Colangelo, Biden's number 3 at the DOJ before he went to prosecute Joe's political opponent, has brought criminal charges against Trump. Principally, they say for the purposes of assisting Joe Biden's campaign and inflicting damage against Trump. Andrew Cuomo even said this. He's the former governor. He said, you know, if his name wasn't Trump, they wouldn't have even charged this guy. Obviously true. Bragg's charges are so weak that everybody across the board say it's ridiculous. They all are decrying the charges as a threat to the rule of law. Look at all these comments. This one came out from the St. Louis Dispatch. They say ridiculous. Here's one. David Rifkin Jr. violated due process. This guy says it's stupid. This guy says it's stupid too. Look at all these other people. You're dumb, Merchan. And these cases are ridiculous. And these charges are terrible. Now, Bragg nonetheless doesn't care. He brought a criminal trial before Judge Merchan, who also violated the judicial ethical rules by donating to Joe Biden. Merchan literally donated to Stop Republicans. And now he's the judge who's presiding over the case against the top Republican. Now, Judge Merchan's daughter, Lauren, also has a political consulting company that attacks Trump and stands to gain financially from a conviction. And Judge Merchan refused to recuse himself. He She knew that he donated it to Trump and Trump's general election opponent, not Trump. And Judge Merchan also then gagged him, said, don't talk about my daughter. Okay, if she wants to raise a bunch of money for Democrats and she's getting some benefits from me prosecuting the opponent of her clients, leave us alone. Alvin Bragg charged Trump with bookkeeping offenses. And to get around the statute of limitations and to elevate those minor misdemeanor offenses into felonies, guess what? Bragg chose to charge Trump with bookkeeping offenses with the intent to commit another crime. But guess what? Those other crimes would have been misdemeanors. So it's weird. So he turns a misdemeanor into a felony by bootstrapping it to another misdemeanor, another crime that's not even a felony. Pretty amazing how that works. Bragg then refused to specifically identify what conduct other than the bookkeeping offenses Trump was even accused of committing. Didn't really matter. Jurors could pick a crime, any crime. They had a bunch of options here. Could have been this, could have been this, could have been this. Didn't even need unanimity to it because judge said so. In fact, here's what paragraph 24 says. Judge Merchan also instructed the jury that you don't even have to unanimously agree about what other conduct Trump allegedly committed. Now, the days before the jury was set to deliberate, the President of the United States, Biden, sponsored a press conference in front of the courthouse where his campaigners demanded the jury convict Trump. And that's when they brought out Robert De Niro, I think. And he's screaming at everybody over there. What the heck? What's wrong with you? Unlike the voters in November, the jurors had the power to vote him out once and for all. Now, the jury came out. Biden was sending his mob there to convict. And then all of a sudden, the jury issued guilty verdicts 2 days later. Now, before the trial, the judge also issued a gag order. That order is a prior restraint. It's a gag. It was presumptively unconstitutional. But the judge really needed it to stop because everybody was talking about his daughter and couldn't have Trump talking about it because it made him look totally partisan and biased because he is. Now, among other things, it prohibited Trump from publicly challenging the credibility and the political motivation of the witnesses. Remember Michael Cohen, who already admitted to lying in federal court when he took his plea deal, or Stormy Daniels and all of her inconsistencies. We couldn't even talk about her documentary. Trump got none of the exculpatory evidence that may have been in there. And it prevented him from publicly drawing connections between the prosecution and between Trump's election opponent. Now, the order permitted Judge Merchan to literally jail him. Merchan then let the gag order stay on in place for a month after the trial as well. On June 25th, he amended the gag order, but refused to lift it. So Trump is still prohibited from criticizing the prosecutors. That includes Matthew Colangelo. Now, he can talk about Alvin Bragg, but he can't rip about Matthew Colangelo. He was formerly Joe Biden's third-ranking DOJ attorney. He resigned from the number 3 at the DOJ, the most powerful justice agency in the country, in the world, to go work for Alvin Bragg. Now, he did that just so he could go prosecute Trump, because that's what his entire basis for existence is. Now, sentencing was originally scheduled for July 11th, but as of July 2nd, it's been moved to September 18th. How come? Any sentence, even probation, is going to interfere with Trump's ability to freely campaign across the country. Yeah, so probation meaning that Trump doesn't have to report into custody unless he's on home detention or something like that. But here's the pattern of lawfare. They say, all right, this has been going on for a long time. This is to the Supreme Court of the United States from the state of Missouri. They say Bragg's criminal charges are only the latest example in an 8-year pattern of lawfare brought against Trump. A full account is far too lengthy to include here, so a brief snapshot is provided instead. Now, the lawfare began against Trump as early as 2016. Remember that? The recently released special counsel report by John Durham confirms that in 2016, the FBI criminally fabricated evidence to obtain a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. They spied on his campaign. No one's gone to jail for that. The FBI never had any actual evidence of that at all. Just an investigation into the 2016 campaign. Instead, some FBI attorney named Kleinsmith committed a criminal offense by fabricating language in an email that was material to the FBI in obtaining a FISA surveillance order. Now, the investigation was launched by people who had a predisposition to investigate Trump. For example, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were directly involved in matters. When Page messaged Strzok, the FBI lovers, Lisa said, "Trump's not going to become president, right, baby? Right?" Strzok replied, "No, he's not, Lisa. We'll stop it." Oh, how are you going to stop it? By what? Breaking the law? Oh, you did. Now, as soon as he obtained the opportunity to launch an investigation aimed at stopping Trump, Peter Strzok opened the Crossfire Hurricane investigation immediately, like a rigged hack. Now, following the FBI's criminal fabrication of evidence to spy on Trump, they gave that guy he's a regular commentator on MSNBC or something. Political opponents then harassed Trump. They ran a baseless conspiracy theory. They called Trump a Russian asset. Remember that? Special counsel Robert Mueller concluded in March 2019 that there was no any evidence at all of any conspiracy at all. And all the Trump-Russia stuff is so dumb in hindsight, doesn't it? I mean, it looked dumb when we were watching it, but even in hindsight, like, how could these people even believe that for a second? They did it again with the 51 intelligence people saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. They all believed it or lied to us, like they lied to us about Joe Biden's dementia. But regardless, the very existence of the special counsel investigation interfered with Trump's ability to exercise his executive authority. Justice Scalia already warned about this. Says, do not invite that. What Justice Jackson described as picking the man and then searching the law books or putting investigators to work to pin an offense on him, right? Show me the man, I'll show you the crime. I'll find you anything for that guy. So then in 2020, the FBI did it again. They tried to rig 2016. They screwed that up. They're like, not going to let this happen again. Trump won. Not going to do it again. So the FBI intervened. For a year, the FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop in its possession, and it knew a story was about to be written about the contents. A story that would be so bad for Joe they had to do something. So the FBI, quote, badgered platforms to adopt various policies to censor the, quote, hacked materials in order to suppress the story. The lawfare went on all over the place. Several states relied on off-the-wall novel theory after that, right? So the FBI was in there censoring people. Then the states came back out, and we had Crazy Eyes Griswold and Jenna Bellows from Maine and Jocelyn Benson and all these secretaries of state who are cheaters, man. They tried to throw Trump off the ballot. Then the Supreme Court had to come back in and say, hey, Crazy Eyes, come on, put some glasses on. Similarly, one prosecutor in Georgia has tried to use racketeering laws in an unprecedented way to go after Trump, and the Georgia Court of Appeals had to put that case on pause. Now, New York's actions continue this pattern of lawfare. Indeed, Bragg is not the only official in New York who has targeted Trump. The New York Attorney General, Tish James, who takes her shoes off, stinking up the entire building, in court brought a case against Trump to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars and saying he needed to be fined for all of that. And it didn't stop there. Alvin Bragg was previously involved in more than 100 cases against Trump. He campaigned on a promise to prosecute Trump. He recruited Colangelo to come in and prosecute Trump. And then when Bragg came in, he resurrected this entire case. His predecessor sent this case to the grave because he had concerns about it. And the facts surrounding this indictment have already been known for years, okay? That's why Bragg had to resurrect it. Michael Cohen, President Trump's disgraced lawyer, he already pleaded guilty over 5 years ago to charges based on these same facts. And by 2019, federal prosecutors determined that no additional people could be charged other than Cohen. Everyone declined to prosecute Trump because he didn't do anything wrong. It was not until after President Trump announced he was running for president again that Alvin Bragg got the phone call. Said, you got to do something about this, my man. The timing and the basis for Bragg's prosecution show political motivation. The facts at the center of the case have not changed at all since 2018. No new witnesses have emerged, and the filing of this indictment is very suspicious, especially in light of the fact that Joe Biden has encouraged the prosecution of Trump. For example, we've seen it before. After the FBI and the DOJ declined to prosecute Trump for more than a year, Biden's sitting around, he's saying, what the heck? The New York Times got a leak from the Biden White House. Someone said that Trump, quote, should be prosecuted. And suddenly, around the same time, Joe Biden, who is the leader of the Justice Department, he's now saying, prosecute Trump, they do. After this new directive leaked from the White House, and 1 month after Trump announced he was running for president, Alvin Bragg hired Colangelo. Colangelo got the notice. Anybody know any good prosecutors who are good against prosecuting Trump? Colangelo's already done it. Colangelo has a history of taking on Trump and the family business. That's why he was hired. And so in order to make this work, they had to elevate a misdemeanor. It was a time-barred, statute of limitations prohibited bookkeeping offense. They had to elevate it into a felony. Bragg had to charge Trump with that other subsection. Now, the prosecution advanced some bizarre theory saying that Trump violated another federal election campaign law. But that's strange because federal prosecutors didn't charge him with that. Now, despite New York's attempt to enforce a statute, the New York State, Attorney General Garland took no action to intervene. So the DOJ was not protecting their own jurisdiction. We also see that unredacted FEC documents show the DOJ had no issues intervening in other cases. But when Bragg tried to enforce federal law that the DOJ had already reviewed and determined Trump did not violate any crime, the department just sat on their hands. Right? You see in the movies when the feds come in, like, this is our case, get out of here. And the cop's like, no, it's our case. Why do the feds always come in here? And they investigate it anyways, and they usually solve the case or whatever. Here, DOJ just said, well, we know you're probably not supposed to be prosecuting that, but go ahead because we want you to. So they say this is irreparable harm. It's harming Missourians and the rest of us. They say Trump's conviction is very likely to be overturned on appeal. They're already backpedaling on it since the immunity decision came out. But by then, the constraints that New York has already imposed will already have had their full effect. Missouri has a strong and judicially enforceable interest in its citizens being able to hear Trump's speech, and we cannot hear him if he's gagged. Unlike most other states, Missouri does not have a pledge law requiring electors to vote for a certain candidate. So although Missouri electors typically cast their electoral votes for the candidate representing the same party, the electors are free to exercise their discretion. So they need to be able to hear from Trump. Now, New York has interfered with that, and Missouri electors have a protectable interest in this information. Because Missouri electors are state officials, Missouri has the ability to sue on their behalf. So don't try to come in here and say we don't have any standing on this. We are filing literally for people who have their free speech rights impacted, and they need to have those so that they can go cast their votes accordingly. Now, there is currently a scheduled Trump campaign event in Missouri, so we've got standing here too. But under the current gag order, when Trump shows up here, he's not going to be able to say what he wants to say. Even if the Trump campaign could not visit Missouri, we have a lot of other connections to this issue. This is why Missouri has standing. Social media, television, it all prevents Trump from speaking the truth inside our state. And so Missouri electors will be chosen by the people of Missouri, and so we can sue. And you are interfering with our rights. Now here, the associational aim of millions of Missourians is to elect Trump to the presidency. He's currently leading the Republican Party, and New York's actions directly interfere with that claim. And so here are our various counts. Count 1, Alvin Bragg, state of New York, and all the Democrats there say that you are now interfering with the presidential election in the other states. For over 200 years, this court, the Supreme Court, has consistently held that states cannot interfere with or impede or burden legitimate federal elections. Supreme Court, you decided that back in 1819. And presidential electors are free in our state. Now, New York's gag order impedes the ability of them in doing their jobs. It's an informational injury. And this is one of the most recognized, most basic political rights. We don't have information. So how can we participate in our so-called democracy? Missouri's electors will be chosen in November, and several of the prospective electors have even filed affidavits. They say, hey, we've got concerns, okay? We can't hear from Trump. The gag is preventing us from doing our jobs. We have a direct, concrete harm. And New York doesn't have any authority under the Constitution to do this. They're interfering with our constitutional obligations here. Now, New York has, of course, they say, yeah, it's true. They have the ability to conduct their own criminal proceedings, but the timing of these proceedings must not interfere with the presidency, and there's no substantial justification for them to do this here. And so this court has the obligation to give us an order staying New York from using its coercive authority to stop Trump from campaigning in the months leading up to the election. Don't bog him down in here. Let him get out there and speak. This is also a violation of the Purcell Doctrine. They say, you know, listen, Supreme Court, remember, court orders that are affecting elections, especially conflicting orders, can themselves result in voter confusion and consequent incentive to remain away from the polls. So the doctrine here is, you know, hey, orders like this that are conflicting, that like candidates should be able to speak about something because it's an election, so he kind of needs that, but you're going to gag him because it's harmful to your case or whatever. So those are conflicting. So such orders, if they're conflicting like that in the middle of an election, are pretty confusing to people. And so those are generally prohibited in the months leading up to an election, but Bragg and the prosecutors don't care. So there is no doubt that New York's actions greatly affect voters and the confusion of them. And so publications like the New York Times have run articles asking many questions about the effects of this. Whether Trump can even run for president now? Is he even allowed to be in this case since he's a convicted felon? So some people might say, well, he's a convicted felon, I guess he can't run. Or he's got a gag order on him, so he can't run. Now, questions in the press also abound how a sentence and gag order would affect the executive authority. And there's so no reason why this type of principle shouldn't apply here. So we ask that the court, Supreme Court, stop New York, make them stop using their coercive authority to prevent Trump from campaigning. And then lastly, count 3, they say citizens of Missouri and us too, we have a well-established right to receive information and ideas, not only Trump speaking it, but the right to receive it. This right is at its apex, at its climax, at the highest point in the context of a presidential campaign. After all, it is the only through free debate and the free exchange of ideas that the government remains responsive to the will of the people. That's why we have the First Amendment, and it's the first, not the 7th or 8th. It's the oil that lubricates the entire society. society. And the reason why it's important to have free debate and free exchange is so we have good policy. But Democrats have terrible policy, and so do a lot of Republicans, to be fair. So they'd rather limit our debate and our free exchange of ideas, lest we know that they're incompetent. So New York's gag order, says Missouri, is now impeding, and the impending sentence interfere with the ability of others to receive Trump's speech. Now, where governmental action interferes with speech indirectly, that might be okay, so long as it's neutral. But nothing in this prosecution is neutral at all. Trump was specifically targeted for the purpose of trying to impose political damage. There is no reason for New York to impose a gag order and a sentence now, rather than waiting and permitting the presidential election to proceed as intended. And so we now ask, under Section 2 of Article 3 and the U.S. Code, to stop New York from gagging and limiting Trump's campaign. And so they say, Supreme Court, with all this being said, we now respectfully ask that the Supreme Court step in here and declare that New York's existing and impending restrictions on Trump's ability to campaign unlawfully interfere with the election. So come out and say this is election interference. And while you're doing that, stop, stay, or enjoin any gag order, any sentencing order, or any other order, or exercise of coercive authority that would limit or interfere with Trump's ability to freely campaign. And keep that injunction in place until at least after the November election, and grant any other relief as deemed appropriate and proper. Signed by Andrew Bailey and Joshua Devine from the Attorney General's office there in Missouri. And so we've got a lot of truth there, but Andrew Bailey showed up over on the Dana show. Dana is over at the Dana Loesch show, and she was speaking with Andrew Bailey, the man himself behind the filing. Here is what he said.
48 hours with the Democrat Party.
Oh my gosh, they're in an infinitely regressive death spiral. I mean, it's absolutely, it would be comedic if it wasn't injecting poison into the Democratic election process and depriving Missourians and citizens of every state the right to actually engage in a meaningful way in a national election in the heat of a campaign in the most consequential presidential election in this nation's history. Let's start with this idea that Biden shouldn't be on the ticket. The rest of us knew that months ago. They should have pulled him before these states had their primaries and their caucuses. Now they're wanting to play a shell game. Again, that undermines the integrity of the election process. Why did we have primaries and caucuses if they're going to play a shell game and swap somebody out for an unknown and then deny us of our meaningful voice? But then you see Joe Biden reacting to the immunity decision from the United States Supreme Court. And like, has anyone told this guy that he probably missed the early bird special and they're out of tapioca pudding because he was out doing a press conference at 5 p.m. And oh, what a press conference it was. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. No questions from the media. This guy should be popping champagne. This means that he can't be prosecuted for aiding and abetting in human trafficking and fentanyl distribution from the chaos at our southern border. This benefits him. I mean, this is absolute insanity. And I absolutely think that he should not be the president of the United States, but the Democrats shouldn't be allowed to swap him out now. That's totally unfair.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's what Clyburn was talking about, do a mini primary, because if they do what you're talking about, they're cutting all the delegates out of the equation. And then it's just, you know, the power players within the Democrat Party that are deciding who the substitute's going to be. And that scares me as too, because it's all the people who have been leading these witch hunts this entire time. Let me segue into the New York case, because Missouri v. New York lawsuit filed today. And this has to do with the jurisdiction of this case. So for the people who, because I know that there's so many things Democrats have been throwing at the former president, for the people who may need a recap, this is that suit where they tried to like straw man up something to charge him with to take it out of state court and make it a federal court issue. And that's what you're challenging.
Yeah, that's right. Look, this lawfare against President Trump, again, it's undermining the integrity of the democratic process. They're supposed to be the sacred guardians of our democracy. And yet what they're doing is essentially denying people the ability to engage in a presidential election. Missouri is a sovereign state with a sovereign interest in participating in a national election on equal footing with every other state. And we can't let a rogue prosecutor and a collusive judiciary in the state of New York and their communist witch hunt persecution, President Trump, that takes him off the campaign trail and silences him. That's depriving Missourians and anybody else access to a presidential candidate in the heat of a campaign. It's unconstitutional to allow one state to deprive other states the ability to participate in a meaningful way in that election. That's why we filed suit. And you're right. Article 3, Section 2 of the United States Constitution gives original jurisdiction to the Supreme Court. It's Missouri v. New York. Game on.
All right. So Andrew Bailey on the Dana show. You can follow her show over at Dana Loesch Radio, and a great guest and a great conversation about what's happening there as Missouri fights to protect the rights of its citizens, and hopefully other states will follow, because what the Democrats are doing is clearly election interference. They're rigging 2024 right now. Don't have to wait until after election night to see more water main breaks votes and big slews of ballots being dropped off in wheelbarrows. It's happening right now. Missouri's digging into it. Hopefully other states join. We're going to continue to cover, and we hope you join us as we do. Thank you so much for subscribing, my friends, to our channel, wherever it is you're watching this. And we'd love it if you invited someone you know or love to come check the channel out as well. We've got a lot of coverage coming up on this case and much more. So we'll look forward to seeing you back over here and on the next video, which is coming up. It's all about Merrick Garland because he's getting sued as well. We'll see you over there and back here on the next one.